In the distant reaches of the galaxy, where stars flickered like forgotten dreams and space itself was a playground for the bold, there was a black market unlike any other. This was not just a place for the exchange of goods, but a universe of its own. Planets, ships, and entire species were traded like merchandise, and the highest bidder always won. The rules were simple. Everything had a price. But sometimes, the cost of something was far more than what one bargained for. Ronan had no intention of entering the black market today. He was here to escape. With a bounty on his head, a debt that could end his life, and nowhere else to go. He had no choice but to step into this treacherous place. The space station was chaotic, buzzing with merchants shouting and offering strange goods from worlds he couldn't even imagine. The air was thick with the smell of exotic spices and rare metals. Ronan pushed through the crowd, his eyes scanning the stalls for anything that could help him get out of this mess. His hand brushed against a small, alien creature that looked like a cross between a spider and a bird, its legs skittering with a strange metallic hiss. Ronan barely flinched. It wasn't the strangest thing he had seen, not by far. But then he saw something, or rather, someone that caught his eye. A figure stood in the far corner of the marketplace, surrounded by a group of shady-looking individuals. The figure was tall, towering above the crowd, with a body made of muscle and scales. His face was obscured by a mask, but there was an undeniable presence about him. He was different. A small sign next to the figure read, "For sale, human compatible, no refunds." The words were written in several alien languages, but Ronan knew what it meant. This was no ordinary product. It was a sentient being offered for sale like a piece of livestock. It was a mercenary, a soldier, and perhaps much more. The dealer, a squat. For a covered alien with too many eyes, noticed Ronan's gaze and waddled over, his voice oozing with a mix of salesmanship and something darker. "You're interested?" the dealer asked in a gravelly voice. "This one is special. He's a warrior, strong, capable, and he'll do whatever you need." Ronan raised an eyebrow. "What's the catch?" he asked, already knowing the answer. There is always a catch in places like this. The dealer smiled, showing too many teeth. "No catch. Just a simple transaction. You pay the price, and he's yours. He's been trained to follow orders. No questions. No hesitation. The ultimate weapon. The ultimate servant." Ronan glanced at the being standing silently in the corner. There was something about him, something almost human, in the way he stood still, waiting. Ronan couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it was as if he wasn't just some mindless slave, but a person trapped in a body built for war. "How much?" Ronan asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. The dealer raised his hands and gestured to the creature. A small price for someone so powerful. "Only 100,000 credits." Ronan's heart sank. He didn't have that much. He barely had enough to keep his ship running. But the look on the creature's face, calm, almost serene, stirred something in him. It wasn't just about buying a weapon. It was about buying something that might change everything. Desperation sometimes breeds poor decisions, and Ronan was feeling the weight of desperation in his bones. With nowhere else to turn, he made the decision without thinking it through. "I'll take him," he said. Pulling out what little money he had, the dealer grinned wider than before, his many eyes glinting with satisfaction. "Excellent choice, human. You won't regret it." The exchange was quick. No ceremony, no speech. Just the passing of credits and the handing over of a key to a cage that held a life. Zarak, the alien mercenary, was now Ronan's to command. The moment the transaction was complete, Ronan felt a strange sense of unease. It wasn't fear of what he had just done, it was something else. He had bought a person. Not a tool, not a machine. A person. Zarak stepped forward, his movements fluid and graceful, like a creature born to fight. The mask on his face remained, hiding whatever expression he might have had. Ronan felt a chill run down his spine. The creature's presence was both intimidating and strangely calming. There was power in the way Zarok moved, but there was also something ... restrained. Something controlled. So what now? Ronan asked, more to himself than to the mercenary. He had no plan, no idea what he was supposed to do with someone like HFY. To his surprise, Zarok responded, his voice deep and rich, carrying a weight that Ronan hadn't expected. You paid for me now. Do it. Ronan blinked, confused. What did that even mean? He had just purchased a mercenary, not whatever this was. But before he could ask, the dealer's voice interrupted. He's bound by the transaction. The dealer explained with a chuckle. He will do whatever you ask. It's his nature. Ronan nodded slowly, though he didn't feel entirely comfortable with the situation. The dealer gave him a pat on the back and walked away, leaving him standing there with Zarok. All right then, Ronan muttered, scratching his head. I guess you're coming with me. For a moment, there was silence between them. The marketplace continued to hum around them, but in that small corner, it felt like the world had narrowed down to just the two of them. You don't have to obey me, Ronan said, his voice quieter than before. You're free to go. I didn't buy you to make you a slave. Zarok stared at him for a long moment, his eyes unreadable beneath the mask. Finally, he spoke again, this time his tone softer, almost confused. You do not want me to follow your orders? Ronan hesitated. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't here for another war. He wasn't here to command someone else. He just wanted to get away from the trouble that followed him like a shadow. But something about Zarok, something about the way he stood there, waiting, expecting to be told what to do, made Ronan feel uncomfortable. No, Ronan said, shaking his head. I didn't buy you for that. I don't want to own you. I just need to figure out what to do with you. For a moment, Zarok stood still, and Ronan wondered if he had made a huge mistake. Then, in an almost imperceptible movement, Zarok nodded. It wasn't the nod of a servant. It was the nod of someone ... Someone who understood. Someone who had been waiting for a reason to fight for something that wasn't just survival. Ronan didn't know it then. But he had just made the first step in a journey that would change both their lives forever. Ronan and Zarok had spent the next few days in relative silence. The alien mercenary had followed him without question, his presence as unnerving as it was reassuring. Ronan had never imagined his life would come to this, to be in the company of a creature like Zarok, someone who could have ended his life with a single move. Yet, here they were, traveling through the galaxy as unlikely companions. The more Ronan thought about it, the more he realized something strange about their arrangement. Zarok was no ordinary mercenary. His calm demeanor, his silence, the way he followed Ronan's every step, it never once acted like a servant. Something was off. This wasn't the mindless obedience he had expected. Ronan wasn't sure if it was out of kindness or sheer curiosity, but he started talking to Zarok in ways he hadn't expected. He wasn't sure why. Zarok made him feel like he could be more than the man on the run. They were sitting in the cockpit of Ronan's ship, a small freighter that had seen better days. When Ronan broke the silence, "What happened to you?" he asked, glancing at Zarok. The alien didn't respond right away, his face still hidden beneath the mask. Ronan had grown used to that mask, though the mystery behind it lingered in his mind. Was Zarok even capable of expressing emotions? I was created, Zarok finally said, his voice low. For war. For destruction. Ronan turned to face him, surprised. He hadn't expected Zarok to speak so openly. Created? Ronan repeated, intrigued. So you weren't born, like me? No, Zarok answered. I was born from the will of my people. My species used their advanced technology to engineer warriors beings like me. I was trained to fight. I never knew what it meant to choose. Ronan felt a pang of sympathy. He had always assumed that Zarok was simply another mindless killer. But what Zarok was saying made him see things differently. That doesn't seem right, Ronan said softly. No one should live like that. To be created for war and not have a choice. Zarok looked at him for a long time, his gaze hidden behind the mask. But Ronan felt a strange shift in the unspoken bond forming between them. I was bought, Zarok said after a long silence. but now, I don't know what to do. I feel free, but I don't know how to be. Ronan's heart softened. He had seen himself in Xerox's eyes. A man trapped by his own choices, running from his past, unsure of his future. You don't have to be a weapon anymore, Ronan said, his voice full of conviction. You're not just some tool. You're free now. But Xerox seemed to doubt that. He lowered his head slightly, as if wrestling with his own thoughts. I don't know what freedom means, he admitted. I have been a weapon for so long. It is all I know. Ronan thought about what to say next. He knew the feeling all too well. For most of his life, he had been running from something, whether it was debts, enemies, or just the life he had created for himself. But Xerox didn't have that same freedom. He had never had the chance to be anything other than a weapon. Ronan didn't want Xerox to feel trapped by his past. Well, then we'll figure it out together, Ronan said, a smile creeping onto his face. One step at a time. You've never had the chance to be free, but that's about to change. Xerox stared at him for a moment, still processing the words. Finally, he nodded slowly. Together, then. As Ronan turned back to the controls, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the only one who could change. The next few days were a blur of travel and quiet moments. They jumped from one star system to another, hopping from planet to planet, never staying too long in one place. Ronan didn't know exactly where he was headed, but as long as he kept moving, the debt collectors wouldn't be able to catch up with him. And Xerox seemed to be adjusting, learning, growing more comfortable with the idea of freedom, but it wasn't long before their pasts caught up with them. They landed on a small, desolate planet, just another outpost on the fringes of the galaxy. It was the perfect place to lay low. Ronan hadn't planned on staying long, but as they disembarked, something didn't feel right. The air was thick with tension, and the local population seemed to be on edge. Ronan glanced over at Xerox. Stay close. I'll grab some supplies, and we'll head out. But before they could even make it to the supply station, they were surrounded. A group of armed men, their weapons drawn, blocked their path. Ronan's heart sank when he saw their insignia, the symbol of the cartel that had once owned. Xerox, the same cartel that had been hunting him ever since he bought the alien. Mercenary Ronan, one of the men growled, his voice full of venom. You think you can just run from us? You've got our property, and now it's time to pay. Ronan stepped back, trying to keep his cool. He had hoped to avoid them, but it seemed they were too persistent. There was no way out now. The cartel had found them. Let's not make this worse than it has to be, Ronan said, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. But he knew it was futile. The men were here for one thing: Xerox. Behind him, he heard Xerox move, his body shifting with quiet determination. The mercenary's hand went to the weapon at his side, but he didn't draw it. Instead, he took a deep breath, his voice carrying through the tense silence. You want me? Xerox said, his voice calm yet filled with a quiet fury. You'll have to take me. The cartel members laughed, clearly underestimating Xerox. They didn't know the half of it. One of the men took a step forward, drawing his blaster. You're coming with us, Xerox. No more running. But as the man took another step, Xerox was already moving. It was a blur of motion, a series of swift, calculated strikes. The men barely had time to react. In seconds, they were disarmed, thrown to the ground, and left gasping for air. Xerox didn't kill them. He didn't need to. He had proven his point. Ronan stood in shock as he watched the mercenary's speed and precision. This wasn't just a trained fighter. This was someone who had been held back his entire life, waiting for the moment to break free. When the last man crumpled to the ground, Xerox turned back to Ronan. His eyes were wide with surprise, but also with something deeper, a sense of liberation. They weren't expecting me to fight back, Xerox said, a small smile tugging at his lips. Ronan couldn't help but grin. They never are. But the truth of the situation hit him hard. They were no longer just on the run. The cartel was going to come after them harder now. They were marked. Ronan knew that this fight was only just beginning. We need to go, Ronan said, his voice firm. And we need to be ready. They'll come for us again. Zarek nodded, his face unreadable behind the mask. We will be ready. As they boarded the ship and took off, leaving the dust of the desolate planet behind them, Ronan realized something. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about freedom, freedom for both of them. And together, they would fight for it. The stars outside the window were nothing but endless points of light, stretching across the vast expanse of space. Ronan sat in the cockpit of his ship, fingers drumming anxiously on the console. His mind was racing. Ever since their escape from the cartel's grip, everything had been moving faster than he could keep up. Their enemies were relentless, and with each passing day, danger seemed to grow. Ronan's eyes flicked over to Zarok, who stood by the door of the cockpit, staring out into the deep void of space. The alien mercenary had changed since the first day they had met. Once a figure of brute force and obedience, Zarek was now a being with purpose, an individual who had tasted freedom, now refused to go back. The transition hadn't been easy for either of them. Ronan had grown attached to the alien, something he hadn't expected. Zarek wasn't just a tool or a weapon anymore. He was a companion. But there was more to it than that. Over the past few weeks, Ronan had come to realize that their bond wasn't simply built on survival. There was something deeper, a connection that defied logic and reason. "What's on your mind?" Ronan asked, breaking the silence. Zarok turned, his mask hiding any hint of emotion. But Ronan could feel the weight of his gaze. "I have been thinking," Zarok said slowly. "We have fought together, bled together, and escaped death together. But what is it we are fighting for? What is it we want beyond this?" Ronan didn't answer immediately. He had been thinking about that question too. Every day had felt like a race to outrun their enemies, to escape the cartel, to survive. But the truth was, they couldn't keep running forever. Zarok was right. They needed something more than just survival. They needed purpose. "I don't know what I want yet," Ronan admitted. "But I know one thing for sure, we can't let them win. We can't go back to the way things were. Not for you. And not for me." Zarok nodded, but his eyes were distant, almost sorrowful. "And if the battle comes to an end, what will we be left with? Will we still be together?" The words hit Ronan harder than he expected. Together, it was strange hearing them from Zarok's lips. But there was a certain truth to it. They had been through so much together. They had saved each other's lives, fought side by side, and understood each other in ways neither of them had expected. "We will be left with whatever we choose to be," Ronan said, his voice firm. "Together or apart. It's up to us." A long silence followed. Outside, the stars continued to pass by, the vastness of space stretching on. It felt like the whole universe was holding its breath, waiting for something to change. But change was inevitable. Whether they were ready for it or not, the future was coming. Several days later, they found themselves on a barren planet, a world on the edge of the galaxy where few people dared to venture. It was a place of forgotten ruins and broken cities, a perfect hiding spot for someone who didn't want to be found. Ronan and Zarek had come here to lay low for a while, to regroup and plan their next move. The planet's surface was desolate, covered in a blanket of ash and dust. It had been scorched long ago by a war that had left it in ruins. The air was thin, and the ground was cracked and dry. It wasn't a place where life thrived, but it was a place where they could think without the constant threat of pursuit. As they stepped off the ship, Ronan couldn't shake the feeling that this place, this lifeless world, somehow mirrored what they had become, outcasts. Fighting for survival in a galaxy that didn't care, but that wasn't all they were. They were more than survivors now. "We need to find some shelter," Ronan said, scanning the horizon for any signs of civilization. There was nothing for miles but the ruins of a once thriving city. "We will," Zarok replied. "But, Ronan, I need to ask you something." Ronan turned to face him. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, and Ronan could feel the tension building. Zarek had been quiet ever since their conversation in the ship, and now, standing in the middle of the barren wasteland, it seemed as though everything was leading to this moment. "What is it?" Ronan asked, his voice soft. Zarok took a step forward, his eyes locking with Ronan's. The mask still covered his face. But there was a vulnerability in his posture that Ronan couldn't ignore. "What happens when this is over?" he asked. "What happens when we no longer have to fight? When we are free to live without fear, without running?" Ronan's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected Zarok to ask this question. It was the same question he had been avoiding for weeks. The question that had been lingering in the back of his mind since the first moment they had met. I don't know, Ronan said, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I want to find out. I want to find out with you." The first time since they had met, Zarek lowered his head, his shoulders shaking ever so slightly. Ronan couldn't tell if it was because of emotion or if it was simply the weight of the moment. But he didn't need to know. What mattered was that, for once, the two of them were standing on the same ground, facing the future together. "Ronan," Zarek said, his voice quieter now, more vulnerable than before, "I have never known love. I have never known what it means to care for another being. But since I have been with you, I have felt something. Something I cannot explain. I do not know if it is love, but it is something." Ronan felt his heart swell. He hadn't realized how much Zarek had changed, how much the alien had come to mean to him. It was more than just survival. It was more than just fighting side by side. It was ... connection. It was love. "I don't know if I know love either," Ronan said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I know this. When I'm with you, I'm not afraid anymore. And I don't want to face this world without you." Zarok took another step closer, his presence overwhelming yet comforting. The distance between them closed, and in that moment, they were no longer two beings from different worlds. They were simply two souls, bound together by something neither of them had expected. The kiss was unexpected. It wasn't the kind of kiss Ronan had imagined when he first bought Zarek. It wasn't a gesture of ownership or possession. It was a kiss that spoke of everything they had been through, the battles, the fear, the loneliness. It was a kiss that spoke of the future they were choosing to build together. When they pulled away, both of them were breathless, but there was a quiet understanding between them. They were no longer just survivors. They were partners. They had found something worth fighting for, a love that defied the galaxy's expectations. A love that had been born out of struggle and survival, but had grown into something far more powerful. "We can't stop now," Ronan said, his voice full of determination. "We can't let them take everything we fought for. But after this, when it's over, we'll have the rest of our lives." Zarek nodded, his hand resting on Ronan's shoulder. "Together." And for the first time, Ronan believed it. As they walked back to the ship, the horizon stretching before them, Ronan realized that the universe was vast and uncertain, full of dangers and obstacles. But in that moment, he knew one thing for sure. No matter what the galaxy threw at them, they would face it together. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for each other, and that made all the difference.